Hey guys, Steve here at SKS Props, and I'm going to show you how to use some HD foam triangle dowels to make some simple yet effective armor details. Welcome to the shop. For those of you that have followed me for a while, you know that I created this armor for Blick's booth at New York Comic Con. What you may not know is that I created this armor in 10 days, start to finish. What I don't recommend is for most people to do that. Now, I was able to accomplish it because a lot of the details that are added onto here were made by using triangle dowels. Triangle dowels are a fantastic way to add embellishments to your armor, but also a great way to cover up seams. Now, me personally, I hate seeing seams in a lot of my armor, so like in this chest part here, a lot of the pieces are glued together and these dowels were then glued on top. It's ornamental, but yet it serves a purpose. I want to show you guys some very simple techniques to make some basic armor out of 6mm HD foam, which you guys of course can find over at Blick Art Materials, and then using some 10mm triangle dowels to finish it off. We got a lot to do, so let's go ahead and get started. For a custom armor like this, I usually fold a piece of Bristol board in half for symmetry and then freehand draw out a basic design. For this armor, we're going for a layered look, so I take that design and use that to scale my other two pieces. This is an easy way for me to get a visualization for what the armor will look like before I transfer it onto the foam. Once I'm fine with the size and the shape, I transfer that onto some 6mm HD foam with a pencil. Now for demonstration purposes, I'm only doing one, but if you're going to fabricate both arms, you'd want to transfer this template out twice. You can see how easily the pencil can transfer the template onto the foam. There's no reason to use a Sharpie. To cut these templates out, I'm using a medium-sized blade, and remember, you always want to make sure that your blade is sharp to give nice, clean cuts. Now I also have a bandsaw, which works great on foam, and if I have a lot of pieces to cut out, this is my go-to, but it is not a necessity. Now to make the armor retain a curve, we're going to need a 1-inch strip of 2mm HD foam. My foam can be manipulated by hand, but if you need help, you can use a heat gun. You want to lightly heat the surface and roll it. Remember, do not add too much heat because it could burn or scorch the foam. Once the foam has been lightly heated, I roll it by hand and check it for fit on my forearm. After I determine the curve I want, the 1-inch strip of 2mm HD foam is glued into place while the foam is still curved. This will make sure that the foam retains that curve and will not go flat. Here you can see the foam is retaining the curve, and as far as scale and size, the foam piece is looking great. The smaller piece of layered armor is then traced onto this piece. This will give me an outline for my adhesive. Contact cement is used for the main bulk of the body, and then small dabs of super glue are used along the perimeter. This will also help reinforce the curve on this new piece of armor being attached. The hand plate is also curved. Now a small strip is going to attach from the hand plate to this forearm armor. This will ensure that the armor does not move, but it still gives it that layered look. At this point, our foam is looking good, but still pretty basic, so here's where we get to ramp up our details. We're going to be using some 10mm HD foam triangle dowels. Now these dowels come 2 to a pack, each one is 36 inches in length, so you have a lot of material to work with. Now you want to line up the edge of the bevel with the armor, and the first cut we're going to make is going to be at the very top here. It's going to go straight up and down. I like to mark all of my angles with a pencil, and then having my utility blade fully extended cut directly on that line. Super glue will be used to attach these pieces to the foam and make sure that there's not a lot of adhesive that's spilling out. Working on the bevel that attaches to this, I know that I need another straight cut, so I cut that and glue it face to face. Then it's just a process of working down the armor, marking it, and cutting it angle by angle. Now I'm not going to lie, some of these angles are fairly difficult to get, especially on a curved piece, so I like to work at one end and then move my way across. When I'm cutting the other end that is matching up with a piece that's already there, I usually give myself a little bit of extra dowel, that way I can cut it a couple times to figure out exactly the angle I need. The other thing I would tell you not to worry about at this point is that you could have gaps in between some of these angles if you don't get them just right. That's no problem, we're actually going to fill and seal those later on in this process. Here I am continuing to work my way around the armor. Now this is a very time-consuming process, but you want to make sure to do it right. This is really what's going to make all those details on the armor pop. And if you do have a little bit of super glue spill out, that's no problem. Just go ahead and wipe it away with a paper towel. Now that I've got my border complete, I can start thinking about some of the trim pieces that will go on the interior. This top one, for instance, will be glued on either side, and then I'll manipulate it to give it this really cool organic curve. And just like the bevels along the perimeter, these detail ones on the interior can be cut at an angle where they line up almost perfectly. For this detailed curve on the interior, the material is cut to length and then sanded with a rotary tool. A heat gun is then used to smooth over the sanded section. I like to glue the end piece first and then curve around the material as needed. Now after that, the only part that's a little difficult is mirroring to the opposite side. I wanted a few more details along the bottom of this armor, so a few more pieces of the triangle dowels were cut, sanded, heat sealed, and glued into place. Throughout this process, I'm not trying to replicate any particular character's armor in particular, I'm just going with what I think looks cool. To simulate some fake rivets on this armor, I'm going to take a 10mm HD foam round dowel and cut that into small sections. These are then glued onto strategic spots on the armor using super glue. The dowels are still round at the top, so to simulate the hammered metal look, a rotary tool is used to knock down the edges. And as a final fabrication step, a smaller stone bit is used to add some battle damage. I heat up these foam rivets and then pull off any additional foam that is left over after it is cauterized. I've got a few gaps in my bevels and I'm going to show you two different ways to help seal these. The first way is using some quick seal, water, and silicone tip tools. Using the silicone tip tools, the quick seal is pressed into the gaps and then a little bit of water is used to smooth out the surface. This is important because once quick seal dries, you can't really go back and smooth it out. This is a fairly simple process to repeat. Just push the quick seal into any of the gaps and then use your fingers with a little bit of water to smooth out the surface. Another gap filling method that is sandable after it cures is using foam clay. Just like the quick seal, we're going to be using our silicone tip tools and water. A small bit of foam clay is balled up and then using the silicone tip tools dipped in water that is pressed into the gap. The main difference here being is if you do add too much or if you have a larger gap to fill, you can go back and sand it once it's cured. As a non-toxic alternative, I'm going to be using Flexbond and Utrecht brand Mars Black as my base coat on the armor. These are mixed together and generously applied to the armor using a mop brush. I also use the mop brush to give some really cool texture to the flat pieces of the armor. When finished with this step, make sure to thoroughly wash your brush. While the paint mixture is still wet, I go in with a filbert brush and smooth out and get rid of the texture on the beveled areas. This will give a really cool contrast in texture once the paint is applied. After that had dried, I used some Krylon brand red oxide primer. Now having a red base will make the gold trim that I paint much richer. A wash of the Mars Black is applied to the entire surface and that is dried using a hairdryer. Along the borders, more Mars Black is painted on, this time with less water and more pigment. A slightly damp filbert brush is used to feather the paint in further. For the main color of the armor, I'm going to be using Utrecht brand cadmium-free red medium. This is also applied with a filbert brush, but not along the outsides, just in the main middle section of the armor. The paint is put on pretty thin at first and then built up more and more. When I got to my final layers, I added almost no water and kind of did a stippling motion to give it an additional texture. To paint our trim, I'm going to be using Golden brand Iridescent Bronze. Now this paint is very opaque, so you want to make sure not to get it on places that you do not want it or wipe it off immediately. And just a little bit of water is added to make the paint go on smoother. And as you can see, it's very reflective and a single coat of this stuff goes a long way. After I was done painting the rivets, I thoroughly washed my brush. Again, you do not want any of this pigment left in the bristles. A trick that I use to highlight my gold is to actually use silver as the highlight. In this case, we're using Liquitex brand Iridescent Rich Silver. Now this isn't a paint that you want to put all over the place. Be mindful and actually think about where the highlights would be. And it may not seem like it, but this subtle color shift really has a big difference in the overall appearance. As a final pass on the red sections, I'm going to be using the Utrecht brand Iridescent Russet. Now this is a semi-opaque, so what it means basically is that all those highlights and shadows that we have in the red, we're going to paint this over it and it's going to take on those properties. So what I'm doing here is using a filbert brush to paint over the darks and the highlights. This is giving the armor a glaze. Once again, it's a subtle color shift, but makes a huge difference in natural light. So you guys can see the basic steps that it takes to put together some simple armor and then detail it out using some triangle dowels. Now hopefully you guys are enjoying these videos, and if you are, give them a thumbs up and share them with your friends and family. And remember, if you guys are building any of my builds or using HD foam, be sure to tag Blick and SKS Props on Twitter and Instagram because we love seeing your progress. Until next time, thanks for stopping by.